Man, what's up, guys? Hey, happy Father's Day to me. If there's any other dads in the room, shout out to you as well. Hey, but I was really saying that to tell you, if you haven't called your dad, call him. We're going to be continuing our series, Almost Christian, this evening, diving into Acts chapter 4, at the end of 4, going into 5. So if you have a Bible, I invite you to grab it. We're going to be at the end of Acts 4, and 4:36 is where we're going to begin tonight. And to give traction to where we're going, I think that we all have things that on the outside, the act is good, but the motive, to say the least, is questionable. So, and I think this happens in a lot of things in our life, but certainly in our worship. This is a bit of an embarrassing story, but it is true. So whenever I was in 7th grade, I encountered God in a very real way in 6th grade. This is before I ran from God in those years of my life. And in 7th grade, I noticed that there was pretty girls in the youth group. And so what I thought would be a good idea, like we were just singing in worship, and I was like, I hear good Christian girls like good Christian guys that do things like lift their hands. And so it got to that, come awaken the people. And at that moment, I'm just like, this is my moment. And I lift up my hand and I start flexing my arm as much as I can. I mean, it was just like, and I had no muscle. I was in 7th grade, and it was just like a little string bean waving in the Lubbock wind. It's like a little white Q-tip waving in the air, like I just don't care. And I was like, hey, girl, my hand is free for you. She didn't grab it. And so, but man, like, obviously you would see that, and maybe you go like from the outside, like, man, that guy, because I was like, you're like, man, he might be being filled, he was slain in the spirit, so I don't know what's going on. And on the outside, you go like, man, it seems like he's really worshiping. He's really into it. And on the inside, I was like, I hope she sees, because I'm about to pass out. And man, like these acts that we do, what we're going to see in this passage that we're going to read, there's this couple with this worshipful act that they do is anything but a good motive. And we're going to dive into that as God is going to give our hearts a motive check tonight. But we're going to read this passage together, as we see that they look good on the outside, but something different is going on inside of them. It begins at the end of chapter 4, verse 36. It says, thus Joseph, who was called by the apostles Barnabas, which means son of encouragement, a Levite, a native of Cyprus, he sold this field that belonged to him and brought the money and laid it at the apostles' feet. So this is a good act of worship that this guy does. And in contrast with Barnabas, enter in the people we're going to focus in on tonight. Ananias and Sapphira, 5:1 says this, but a man named Ananias with his wife Sapphira sold a piece of property, and with his wife's knowledge, he kept back for himself some of the proceeds and brought only a part of it and laid it at the apostles' feet. But Peter said, Ananias, why has Satan filled your heart? Just got intense. You're like, dang, Satan just entered. To lie to the Holy Spirit and to keep back for yourself part of the proceeds of the land. While it remained unsold, did it not remain your own? And after it was sold, was it not at your disposal? Why is it that you have contrived this deed in your heart? And so he's saying it's not about like that you didn't give this much or you gave that much. It's not about what you gave. It's something else that's going on. There's a hidden motive that Satan had filled them with that isn't directly said. And he says this, that you have not lied to man, but to God. Verse 5, when Ananias heard these words, he fell down and breathed his last. My guy dies. And great fear came upon all who heard of it. The young men rose and wrapped him up and carried him out and buried him. And after an interval of about 3 hours, his wife came in, not knowing what had happened. And Peter said to her, tell me whether you sold the land for so much. And she said, yes, for so much. But Peter said to her, how is it that you have agreed together to test the Spirit of the Lord? Behold, the feet of those who have buried your husband are at the door, and they will carry you out. Immediately she fell down at his feet and breathed her last. And the young men are like, man, But when the young men came in and they found her dead, they had to carry her out too. And they buried her beside her husband. And great fear came upon all of the church, the whole church, and upon all who heard of these things. So, man, we're going to be going into, you could say, some killer truth tonight. You see in this passage that God is dead serious. I joke because that's about the end of the joking for tonight. It's actually a pretty heavy passage. As we dive in, God's going to give our hearts a motive check. And maybe you're going, this is such a fascinating passage of Scripture. And I think that it's going to make sense as we dive into it for how it applies to us tonight. And so as we examine our motives, or let God examine our motives, what drives us? Here's the first point. It's a question. Is my private worship equal to my public worship? And so they come and they lay it at the apostles' feet. Apparently, this was a very public act that people were doing because they saw Barnabas whenever he did it. And so they publicly come before, and man, it looks like this sacrificial thing, like they wanted to be worshipful. But according to God, it obviously wasn't. God was examining something in their private life. And God, he examines our private life more than our public acts. And this is what's going on here. I think first question as we think about, man, why would they do this? We ask, it helps us to answer this question, helps us to see what audience are we living for? Is my personal worship equal to my public worship? What audience am I doing this for? What audience am I living out in front of? Who am I trying to please in my life? Apparently, they were not trying to please God, but somebody else. Maybe themselves, maybe just everyone else around them, because they saw this public act and they wanted the accolades. This is the classic, do I do what I do for the audience of one or for the audience of many? My daughter, she has her end of the year here at our Parents' Day Out program. My daughter Cassie, she has these musicals that she's a part of, and like every grade comes up and they do like their 4 or 5 songs or whatever. And she did like the "I'm a Little Teapot," and it was like the cutest thing ever. And after every single song, so she did like 3 or 4 of their songs. And I was on the front row with my wife Carrie, and she would end and she would loudly say, "Daddy, did you like that?" And everyone heard it. It was like the movie Elf when he's like, "Dad," and she was like, every song at the end of it, she was like, "Daddy, did you like that one, Daddy?" And I'm like, "I liked it, baby." She wants me to know if I like it. Sorry, guys. And man, as I think about that, I'm like, that's how we should be. That's how you and I should be when it comes to us and God. We should be going like, man, Heavenly Father, like God, are you applauding my life? Not just everybody else around me, but what is it that God is seeing whenever God looks at me and how I'm living? Am I living for the audience of one or the audience of many? This is the classic, who are you, right, when no one's watching. That's a statement that we've all heard, right? A character is who you are when no one else is watching. I would say rightly said before us and God to check our motives. I think it's better said to say, who are you when only one is watching? Who are you in the places where only God can see? I think is what this passage is begging us to consider. And so your worship, is your private and your personal worship, is it equal to the public acts of the good things that you do in your life and your public acts of worship? Because for them, for Ananias and Sapphira, obviously they were hiding something. They were hiding what was true, and God sees it. And God sees it with all of us, and this brings us to the next point. As we consider our motives, God sees your secrets. And we've talked about this, I think, every week that we've been in this series so far. This idea has arisen over and over and over again that God, he sees your secrets. It says he says, why has Satan filled your heart to lie to the Holy Spirit? So by revelation of God and God alone, Peter sees their act and God reveals to him that he's seeing right through to the lie and seeing right to what is actually going on. And then he falls down dead. And you're going like, if you're like me, you're like, man, that just got really, really intense. I'm trying to make sense of. So he held back some is what the act was physically. And he gave the other portion and God kills him. Like, why did Ananias and Sapphira have to die? That's the question that I think a lot of us are asking. Like, at first glance, whenever I read this passage, I'm like, man, it kind of makes me want to like shy away from God. Because I'm thinking like, man, like, what if I come to the Lord and my motive isn't completely pure? Is God going to take me out? Is that what this is telling me? Like, is this just for God to kill them? And some people, when these kinds of thoughts, they're caused to shrink back from the Lord. And they're caused to kind of go away from God. Because we think, man, why try if I'm just going to fail and God's going to be mad at me? Is this presenting this kind of angry God who is like Zeus in the sky, waiting to strike us with a lightning bolt if we fail? And I would say, no, that is not what this passage is teaching at all, actually. But that's something that a lot of people would say. So the truth is that all of us are in process. All of us have places where hopefully, maybe even tonight, where we're going to end is hopefully coming before the Lord and saying, God, is there any way inside of me that you want to show me where my motives need to be purified? We're all in process. One of the things we say a lot here is that we are all, if you are seeking Jesus, you are stumbling forward after God. That recognizes that, man, you're going to try to run after Jesus and it's not going to be perfect and you are going to fall. But man, God is gracious and merciful and is drawing you and I to himself to come closer to him. That's a fact. So why does God kill them for it with that said? Well, simply put, there's more going on than meets the eye here. That's why Peter even calls it out and says, I'm not talking to you about how much you gave or didn't give. You could have taken that back at any time, but you have lied before God, and it says that they had contrived. That means that they had put on this front, and it was like they conspired together in this. It was a planned thing, and God saw right through to all of it. But there's more going on than meets the eye. God sees the secret motive that they are hiding that you and I can't see. But here's what I do know about a lot of us is, man, a lot of us, at least a lot of us meaning the world, we have secrets. So I happen to get a Reddit thread every now and then. And those are always fun, right? And anybody went down the Reddit hole before and you're just like clicking and it just gets more and more interesting and juicy as you click along. Well, this Reddit post, it got like 25,000 responses. So quite a few people definitely had thoughts on it. And it was answering this question, what is your secret that you can't tell anyone because it will ruin your life? And I was like, ooh, that's interesting. And one person, it started off like, there's several of them that weren't so heavy. One of them was just like, one person said, all of my passwords are the same word, just different punctuations and numbers afterwards. And if somebody ever figures that out, they're gonna own my life. And is there anybody who don't raise your hand, don't admit it. You're like, it's me. But I think a lot of people, that's them. You're like, calling me out. Okay, cool. Another person said this. This guy said, I'm 40, and my parents have no idea that I never actually graduated college. So I was like, dang. Let's say he's clapping. He's like, that's my plan. It's worked for him. It can work for me. Let's say he took a couple victory laps, and it took him maybe 6 years before he was like, it's not going to work out. For well over a decade, 15, 16 years, this guy had been lying and living this lie out before his parents. I just wonder how deep he went with that. And some of y'all are like thinking, yeah, I wonder if I could pull that off. I talked to someone that they said that they're like in OChem 1, OChem 2, and then another science class, and I was like, I think I would rather get shot than have to do that. But another person, and man, some of them got pretty serious. This guy said, well, my 54-year-old secret for 54 years would ruin several lives. My best friend's little brother is actually my son.
Shut up.
That's what I typed. I was like, shut your mouth. I was like, bro, I guess Stacy's mom did have it going on. You know? No, he's like, I'm sorry. Man, that ain't right, though. That's so wrong. Imagine, like, oh, brother, where art thou? Oh, man, I just imagine holding on to some of these secrets. And there's 25,000 of these, and then, like, some of them were upvoted. Of course, if you've been on Reddit, you know how that works. And, man, it just made me realize, like, it's safe to say a lot of people are carrying a lot of secrets in their life. And here with Ananias and Sapphira, God is seeing the secret. He's seeing the secret motive. And all of us know that this kind of stuff happens. Like we hear the Bill Cosby stories and the Jeffrey Epstein stories. And you know, like nobody sees all that stuff get uncovered. Like supposed to be a stand-up guy, and all this stuff comes out about the different these individuals that had this secret life where they were doing some pretty terrible things. And man, I don't see anybody out there, at least when he was alive. No one was out there with free Jeffrey signs, because we know like that was a just judgment on that guy. If you don't know who he is, go study for yourself. But man, we understand that there can be some things going on behind the scenes that people just have no idea about. And I think this is what's going on in this passage as God is examining Ananias and Sapphira, and he's saying, I'm seeing something that you are not seeing. God sees what we can't see, and he's going to judge what he sees even though no one else can. And as I thought about this, because I was really answering the question, like, is it just for God to kill them? And as we think about that, I would say, no, it is not, because God is a just judge and he sees the unseen story. But also I started thinking, man, sometimes I think just in our culture, and God is not scared of your questions. He's not scared of your doubts. He's not scared of you wrestling. I've been in the car by myself crying out to God because of the pain that I'm experiencing and all this stuff I'm going through, or someone that I love is going through. And man, like God is saying, like, listen, like I'm there for that. I'm willing to take that because I'm a good father that just wants to hold you in. And what I've heard in the way I've said it is that, man, God's chest is big enough that we can beat on it, that we can come to God in our hurt and our pain. But at the same time, I think in our culture, man, we got into this place where we are very, very quick to put God on the stand and ourselves in the judgment seat as we decide whether God is just or not. And here, this passage, I would say, is a pretty stark reminder for all of us that ultimately, we are not the ones that examine God, but God is the one that is examining us tonight. And so as you hear that, the question for us is really, what does he see when he examines the unseen in you? What does he see when he examines the motives that you live with in your life? Are they pure before him or not? It doesn't tell us their motive, like I've said a couple times, but maybe it was a combination of a few of these. Maybe the motive was that they gave because they wanted leverage in the church, because there's people historically, and it's happened, unfortunately, it's been true in the church as well, that people have given, and they've given money because they really were just trying to buy power, and they wanted to go their own way, and they saw a group of people that they could take and make it all about them and their agenda. Maybe that's what was going on. Maybe they just wanted the glory. Like they saw the offering of Barnabas, and they saw everyone kind of like come around him. His name is Son of Encouragement. They're like, man, like I want to be in the spotlight like that. And man, as the Christian life, our goal is not to be in the spotlight, but to actually be a spotlight shining on Jesus, making much of him through our lives. But maybe they just wanted the glory for themselves. Maybe they saw their relationship with Jesus as nothing more than a transaction. So like I gave this, I'm going to give this, at least this bit from the purchase or the selling of the land, and now God owes me. And man, I think a lot of people, in some really interesting ways, we can live as though we're trying to put God in our debt. We're trying to come to God as if he owes us. And I've done this. When life has gotten hard, I've had these, and I think that God has been gentle and merciful and met me in these places where I've come to God and I've been like, God, like, this is what I'm dealing with. I'm giving you everything I've got, and this is how you repay me. Anybody ever thought that line? This is how you're repaying me, God? And here's, as I thought about myself, here's why that's so off, and here's where God has gently corrected me, especially in those kinds of moments. We simply can't put God in our debt. Like God doesn't owe you and I. Like God doesn't owe me. Like I heard Pastor Greg Mott, there was a quote from him, I think it was at the church leadership conference that I was at this year, but Greg Mott, he's the one that started Breakaway Ministry in A&M, and we forgive him for that. But he started that ministry, one of the largest college ministries in the world, I think. And so, but he said this, he said, even if God never gave us another thing, he has given us too much. And that's true. Like God, He went to the cross for me whenever I told him out loud that I hated him. He forgave me over and over again as I had stumbled and I had fallen, and he kept on calling me to himself. He was never done with me, and he's not done with you tonight. But God, he met me there, and he went to the cross while I was still an enemy, and he died on the cross for my sins, rose from the grave to forgive me personally. And man, when you get that, you realize very quickly, like, man, that's enough for me to respond in worship with the rest of my life. But God has done over and above even that as he has taken care of me as I've walked through this life. But God doesn't owe me. So here's a question we could ask ourselves. Do I do the good deeds that I do because I love God, or so that way God will owe me? So that way God will do what I want him to do for me, as if it's a contract. God doesn't want a contract love. God wants a covenant love, a commitment love on your end and on his. And maybe they saw God as just something to use instead of someone to love. Like God was just something, it was a means to another end. And again, man, how do we do this? It's a subtle thing. Maybe for them, they were, again, just using God in their pursuit of glory or power, or maybe a combination and other things. I don't know, it doesn't tell us, but I think we can subtly do this. So for me, I'm an emotional person. And emotions, I think, are good things. And God definitely gave me daughters with lots of it, so that's a good thing. And so, and man, like I'm very emotionally driven, and I noticed that whenever I would go and worship God as I was pursuing Jesus, there was these moments that I would start to get really frustrated because I wasn't, quote, feeling it. I'd be reading the Bible, I'm not feeling it, God. Why am I not experiencing? I would equate that with my experience of God. And I'd listen to worship, and I'd be like, man, this song used to hit. And man, now I'm just not feeling it. And I would have this battle with God. And I realized if I wasn't careful, there are moments that I would chase a feeling more than I was chasing God himself. And when that happens, God is something that you are using as a means to another end. Now, again, I'm thankful for the moments that I'm overwhelmed with God's presence in an emotional way. There's nothing wrong with that, but is that what I'm chasing more than God himself? It's a subtle way that I think we can fall into this, man, am I really chasing God, or am I using him just so I can feel something? Maybe it's as simple as they just wanted to live the partial faith. One foot in the world, one foot in the church. One foot saying like, yeah, I want to give a little bit, I want to hold back and I want to do what I want to do with the rest of my life. And this is what a lot of us do. This is where a lot of us find ourselves for at least a portion of our lives. Like we struggle, we find ourselves living one foot for Friday and Saturday, and then Sunday comes back and we're like, okay, I do want my Sunday, I do want my Jesus time. But man, we struggle with that lifestyle of actually following Jesus every day of our lives. And a lot of us, we have this partial faith, at least for a period of time in our lives. And this is no different with me. Like there was whenever I first started running from God, it was kind of a slow fade. What I mean by that is I was getting high. And so like I didn't know that was coming. But I was getting high, and I started getting high a lot with my friends and stuff. And one day I got super stoned, and I woke up the next morning, and I was actually supposed to lead children's ministry in worship. Except I'm super blazed. And so I go and I'm just gonna try to like fake it till I make it kind of deal. Unfortunately, if that's you, it's best to probably not go and lead worship that day. But I was like, guys, I guess I'm gonna go. And so I start leading them. And that's tough whenever you're singing songs, like Came to My Rescue, or the bridge is, in my life be lifted high, in our world be lifted high, in our love be lifted high. High Lord, high Lord. I was like, okay, God. The older ladies were like, probably like, oh, he's such a sweet man, old young man. And I was like, you have no idea. Okay. And man, I was just living, and I ran from the church and quit going because I was like, I just can't live this much of a hypocritical life. But I lived that lifestyle for a period of time, and these are some of the motives that maybe they were struggling with. A mixture of all of these. And man, for you maybe you're thinking, okay, why doesn't it tell us? If there's like this secrecy that they had, why doesn't it actually just straight up tell us the motive and the why behind it? Well, I think it's actually purposeful. I think that God put it in this book for us to read, not because we're supposed to examine them, but so we would let God examine us. God, where are my motives? How do we uncover the hidden motives in our own lives? I think is the question that we want to wrestle with. And how can we answer that question? Well, the next point is this, is your why matters more than your what. Your why matters more than your what. We see this in verse 3, that Peter says, why? Why has Satan filled your heart? Like, why is it you have done this? And then in verse 4, it says, while it remained unsold, did it not remain your own? And after it was sold, was it not at your disposal? Why is it that you have contrived this deed in your heart? You've not lied to man, but to God. What's the why? God is always examining our why. God is always examining the thing that drives us. He's always looking at the depths of the heart. So a question that I think that we probably should ask more, at least I should in my life. Why do I do what I do? As you sit before the Lord, as you're thinking about this message tonight, why is it that you do what you do? God accepts or rejects our acts of worship based on our why. What do I mean by that? Well, I have a drawing that I want to show you. So this is in my office. So this is, so when Bridget, so obviously one of them's from 2019. So they've been up for quite a long time. But Bridget, whenever she was younger, my 9-year-old, she would draw me lots of pictures. She's like a little artist. As you can tell, she's very abstract. That's kind of her thing. But if you said, so she gave these to me. And if you said, man, why did you put those up in your office? I think that many of you already know the answer without even asking the question, because you would go, yeah, because I'm guessing your daughter gave that to you as an act of affection. That your daughter gave that to you as an act of love. She would say, hey, Daddy, I drew this for you. And it had nothing to do with whether it was going to be, I've never had someone come in and be like, hey, for the one on the left right there, the sheet of paper that's just a spiral notebook, $2,000, would you take that for that? And I'm like, if that's what you want to offer me, I definitely will. But I'm just saying. And still trying to pay for all these other things for her. So, The point is, like, man, they mean a lot to me. Those little pieces, like my daughter came to me today and she gave me a Father's Day little drawing Cassie did. And man, it means a lot. She said, Daddy, I gave it to you. It's your favorite color, Daddy. And And man, I accepted it not based on how well she did or didn't do with the art piece itself. It was all because of why she gave it to me. And some of us, we come to God and we go, man, God, what if I mess up? Like, what if God in my life, if my life is a picture that I'm drawing for you, what if I color outside the lines in some places? And God's going, listen, I know you're going to do that. It's not about how good or not good it is. It's about why you're doing it. You're bringing it to me as an act of saying, God, this is for you. So man, whether my sermon lands or not, that's not really the question. The question is, man, why am I doing it? I love you to God, saying, God, I want you to be the audience. Going back full circle. Is this why you do it? To be straight up, why is it that we should be doing our acts of worship? We should be doing them in response of God's amazing love for us to meet us at our worst moments. That God, when we ran from him, he loved you and he chased you down. And he's chasing some of y'all down even tonight, telling you, hey, I love you. I died on the cross for you. I'm pursuing you. And out of response for that, we say, God, okay, you can have all of me. I don't want to live this partial faith anymore. We give our lives because of God's love in response to it, because he meets us, man, and he changes us. But for this couple, obviously, it's the wrong why. For this couple, an act of devotion is actually an act of deception. This is what's true of Ananias and Sapphira, when we see that in that word, contrived, having a false appearance is what that word means. So is there any, as we come before this passage, I think the invitation is to say, man, is there any deception in me? Like what do we get out of fooling everybody else in our life except God? What good is it for some people to live their entire lives almost Christian, almost actually following Jesus? Man, it doesn't end in a good place for anybody. And this is where this element of fear, and maybe you saw it, it's mentioned twice in verse 5 and 11. It says that great fear fills the people. And man, what are we supposed to do with that? Because God is this God of love, but yet this God says that great fear, he ignites fear in the people here. And what are we supposed to do with that? Well, one, God isn't playing games with our sin. We see that very clearly. God is against evil. God is the judge of all men when we stand before him. But at the same time, we don't want to forget that other things are true about God, like his love and his grace and his mercy. And those things are side by side with each other as we approach God. So what's our response to this great fear idea? I think it's simply this, that we would not downplay sin. But at the same time, we would not miss the gospel. See, here's what this passage isn't teaching. This passage is not teaching that, man, Jesus is chasing after you and me, and man, he's trying to make us pay. Actually, the gospel is that Jesus is chasing after you and me and saying, I paid for you. That's the gospel. So you don't want to miss that, but at the same time, the people are going like, oh my gosh, like this is a very holy God. And there's a guy I recently talked to as we are coming to a close tonight. There's a guy that I talked to and started talking with him in the fall of this last year. And he said, man, if there is a God, I'm mad at him because I had a hard life growing up, and I feel like if God would have been there, it would have been different. And then he said, as I was started to chase different things in my life, I kept going back to Jesus is what he said. And he was kind of engaging. He was agnostic in some ways, I think he would say. At one point was atheist. And he said that, and then as I started to maybe come to some belief, I was like, okay, maybe Jesus is real, but I think my way's better. Is what he told me. He said, I just honestly thought that my way was better than God. And he even tried to get others to not go after God. In conversations that we had, I think he would tell you that he was not living as somebody who was living as a friend of God in any way. But then he had this encounter because Jesus continued to go after him. And he said in this encounter, which was a really powerful encounter for him, that he the next morning after Jesus had encountered him, he said he woke up and he sensed for the first time in his entire life the weight of his sin before a holy God. He said, I'd never felt that. I'd never sensed that. But I realized, man, who I really am in my own broken state without Jesus. And he said, I realize without God, I am guilty. But in that same moment, and if you were telling me to put a phrase to what was he experiencing, he was experiencing the fear of God, realizing the weight of his own brokenness, his own sin. But in that same, simultaneously in that moment, he says, and God was drawing me near to him. The fear of God will draw you closer. It won't push you away. And he said, I cried out to Jesus. And God saved my life. And here pretty soon, he's looking forward to getting baptized here. God changed him. See, the fear of God is not separate, but simultaneously side by side with the grace and mercy of God. Because whenever I asked him, I said, so what's it been like for you since you, said, God, I'm turning from my sin. I'm repenting to turn towards you, and I want to follow you and what life you have for me. And he accepted the forgiveness of Jesus as Jesus was accepting him. He said, man, I've just been experiencing overwhelming amount of peace. This is what it's like to experience the fear of God. That it would draw you near, that the fear of God, if I was going to give a definition, here it is. A lot of people, the fear of God sounds like a good clothing brand. Somebody should come out with that. But the fear of God, what's the definition? I would say this: it's seeing ourselves for who we really are and our sin for what it is before a holy God. And then we draw near to that God as he's in mercy reaching out, offering to save us, to lead us, to guide us, to power wash our souls, to give us new life, to adopt us as his very own children, and to say, listen, you don't ever have to go back because I got a future for your life and you will be with me forever and ever and ever because I paid the price on the cross for you. And when my arms were nailed open, I paid for your eternity. I experienced separation from God in that moment to save you for eternity. And now I'm offering to save your life right here, right now. This is what this guy experienced, man. And now he's walking in grace and peace. And this is what I've experienced as well. My daughter, she was scared one night. And she had a few nights like this. She's been wrestling with a lot of thoughts and questions for God. And she had this question that I think kind of plays into tonight. She would say, I want to follow God. I want to love God. But what if I don't do enough, is what she said. What if there's some secret stuff I'm trying, but it's just still not enough? And there's still secret motives, is basically what she was saying. Like she even said, what if I don't go to heaven? And she was freaking out. You know what I didn't say? I didn't bow down beside her bed. I didn't go, you should be afraid. You should be very, very afraid. Y'all are like, yeah, bro, you would send her to therapy for the rest of her life. No, I said, and what I said to her is what I want us to wrap our hearts around. I said, God loves you. God desires that you know him. And I said, in your heart, you want God, is what she expressed to me. She said, I think I do want God. And I said, your heart will always be enough for God. That's all God wants. That's all God ever wanted, is your heart. And for you tonight, God is not trying to stir doubt in you. God is just trying to reveal what's true. In Jesus, man, he's speaking to you. Your heart is all I ever wanted. So would we come to God just with our hearts, knowing that Jesus has never outcasted someone who comes to him in honesty. Just saying, Jesus, man, help me bring all of me to you. So I want to take a few minutes this evening, and I want us to dwell on this passage as we let God examine us. Psalm 139, verse 23 and 24, it says this: search me, O God, know my heart, try me and know my thoughts, and see if there be any grievous way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. Would you bow your head and pray with me? God, let that passage be our prayer. Search us, know us. God, purify us. So we want our lives to be an I love you back to you. Would you let God search you in this moment?